back to the Daily Grind. Thanks for checking out the channel. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Oh my god, George St. Pierre is the new UFC middleweight champion. Alright, I'm just kidding. UFC 17 has not happened yet, depending on when you're listening to this. So I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen in that fight. But that actually might have been true. Anyways, it is currently October 26th. UFC 217 is about a week and a half away. Michael Bisping versus George St. Pierre. There's 3 title fights. Madison Square Garden. That fight has not happened yet, but that will be probably the biggest fight card of the year to date. And since these predictions are for the Pettis versus Dustin Poirier card, which is a week after that, a lot of people might not be listening to this until after UFC 217. So some of you guys, that pertains to you. You already know what happened in UFC 217, you lucky bastards. Alright, so let's get to this. I just did all the research. I did the knowledge. I watched a couple fights. Man, I've been doing a lot of research on this fight card. And honestly, some of these fights might not still be on. 1 or 2 of these fights is possible to, you know, somebody might sustain an injury in these next 2 weeks leading up to this fight card. That's possible. That's happened a couple times, but oh well, the rest of the predictions will stand true. So, doing the main card here, we're going to start off with Clay Guida versus Joe Lauzon. Man, this honestly was the hardest fight for me to pick. I had to watch 2 of each of these guys' last fucking 3 fights, Joe Lauzon and Clay Guida, because this is going to be a great fight. This fight can go a couple different ways, man. Joe Lauzon versus Clay Guida, both 2 very experienced UFC veterans. They both made their UFC debut in 2006, which means over 10 years ago. Both of these guys are UFC veterans of over 10 years. Both of these guys, so that's part of why this fight was so hard to pick. So let's just do the knowledge first. Alright, we're going to start with Joe Lauzon. 27-14 overall, 14-10 in the UFC. So this will be his 25th UFC fight. He's 33 years old. As I said, he made his UFC debut in 2006. He's 2-2 in his last 4 fights with alternating wins and losses, and he's coming off of a majority decision loss to Stevie Ray and a split decision win over Marcin Held. Both of those were in 2017, so this will be his 3rd fight in 2017. But if we're going off of alternating wins and losses, which I know we're not, but this would be the fight for him to win because he lost his last fight and he wins, lose. So this would be a win. So he's got notable opponents in his UFC resume: Stevie Ray, Marcin Held, Jim Miller, Diego Sanchez, Evan Dunham, Takanori Gomi, Ali Quinta, Michael Chiesa, Michael Johnson, Anthony Pettis. Joe Lauzon is a vet, need I say more? He's the bigger fighter here, as Clay Guida has fought at lightweight and featherweight. So Joe Lauzon, I believe, has really only fought at lightweight. I mean, he probably not, but I know most recently he's been fighting at lightweight, so he's most likely the bigger fighter here. Clay Guida, he made his UFC debut in 2006 as well. The thing about this, though, one last thing about Joe Lauzon is in his last fight, man, he scored a 10-8 round versus Stevie Ray. Even though he ended up losing the fight versus Stevie Ray, man, in the first round, he almost finished him a couple times. It was a 10-8 round. He was smoking him, but he used too much energy. He wasn't efficient with his energy, as Conor McGregor would say, and he ended up gassing out. But one thing I noticed when I was watching the fight, doing the research on this, was Stevie Ray's corner after the first round said, alright, you know, he got that round. It was a 10-8, but he gets tired. And lo and behold, Joe Lauzon came out and got tired, and he ended up losing the fight and getting outstruck probably the last 2 or 3 rounds. Now, I mean, of course, every decision can be arguable, but at the same time, he lost the fight, and he did get tired, as his opponent's corner thought he would. And the thing about his opponent this fight, Clay Guida, is the cardio king. So that's one way this fight could go. That's why this fight is a toss-up. Clay Guida is the cardio king, but he's 2-2 in his last 4 fights since 2015. He's been a little less active than Joe Lauzon, but he grinds guys out. In his last fight, he he does a lot of things that Marcin Held did. That's what the fight reminded me of, even though he's more of a veteran than Marcin Held. But Clay Guida try and grind guys, get him against the fence, go for the takedown and grind you out. Just fucking grind you out, and then win with his cardio. Joe Lauzon, he can lose because of his cardio. So Clay Guida could very well win this fight. I think if Joe Lauzon shows up with his cardio on point, if he, I don't know what it is with why his opponent in his last fight says he gets tired, and he actually did. So I don't know if that's a consistent theme throughout his entire career or what. But if it's something that he works on, and if he shows up in his cardios, if he's efficient with his energy, then I think he should win this fight. He's a bigger guy. Man, Joe Lauzon is a fucking monster, bro. He's really, really fucking good. I mean, when you look at his resume overall, he's probably fought more experienced opponents as well, or higher level opponents as well. So I'm going to flip the coin and call Joe Lauzon in this fight, but he could lose. I would not be surprised. I'm just flipping a coin on this one, and I'm picking Joe Lauzon. So this was a really hard fight for me to call, but hey, it is what it is. Next fight, a lot easier for me to call, or at least for me to make my prediction. I mean, it's Rafael Assunção is fighting Matthew Lopez. Matthew Lopez is probably going to be a huge underdog in this fight, I would assume. To me, just doing research on this fight and just Rafael Assunção's history in general, he's been being used a little bit as a bantamweight gatekeeper, while the bantamweight division has kind of been stalled out a little bit. I mean, we had Dominic Cruz, who had fights, rivalry fights to get out of the way with Uriah Faber and stuff, and then we had TJ Dillashaw already waiting for his shot for a long time, then he ended up getting skipped. So if your name's not TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, or Dominic Cruz, you probably aren't planning on a title fight, or you haven't been for a while anytime soon, unless you do some shit really spectacular. So in that time, Rafael Assunção has taken it upon himself to keep fighting and fighting guys, I guess, like Matthew Lopez. And in his last fight, who did Rafael Assunção fight? Did I write that down? Oh yeah, Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes was coming over from WSOF on a 13-fight win streak. Rafael Assunção was at the gate, and he motherfucking shut the gate on Marlon Moraes, who also fights on this card, but he fights earlier in the day versus John Dodson. So Rafael Assunção, man, he's way more experienced in the UFC, way more experienced overall. Rafael Assunção is 9-1 in his last 10 fights over some of the top bantamweights in the world, such as TJ Dillashaw he's got a win over, Marlon Moraes, Aljamain Sterling, Brian Caraway. His only loss in his last 10 fights was to DJ Dillashaw at UFC 200. Now Matthew Lopez is only 10-1 overall, as Rafael Assunção is 25-5. So Rafael Assunção has about 3 times Matthew Lopez's fights, and he's only 5 years his elder, so it's not like he's just, a veteran fighting a rookie. Rafael Assunção is 35, Matthew Lopez is 30, so even though youth is on his side a little bit, it's not like, he's, you know what I'm saying? So Matthew Lopez is 10-1, do a little knowledge on him, 2-1 in the UFC. He beat, in his UFC debut, he got beat, and since then he's been on a 2-fight winning streak, but he hasn't fought anyone in the UFC on Assunção's level. And he's also got, as I said, about 3 times less fights. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Rafael Assunção on this one. If Lopez wins, he'll probably be on a few people's radar, or he'll probably be on, he'll definitely be on my radar, but I don't think he's going to win this fight, but it's possible. Next we've got Nate Marquardt versus Cesar Ferreira. And this fight, man, this one was a little tough, but I'm picking Cesar in this fight. Nate Marquardt is 38-18-2, so he's got almost 60 fights. Is that fucking right? Did I write that down right? Holy crap, dog, that's 58 professional fights. Nate Marquardt is 38 years old, coming up on 60. After this fight, this was his 59th professional fight. One fight other than that, he'll have 60. Holy crap. Nate Marquardt is definitely a veteran. He's got 24 fights in the UFC. He's 13-11, so he's about 500 in the UFC. He's 1-3 in his last 4 fights, with his only win coming over a guy I've really never heard of, and the guy I looked into, he's no longer with the UFC, I believe. So his losses came came to Vitor Belfort, Sam Alvey, and Thiago Santos, although I really think he beat Vitor Belfort. So, I mean, there's an asterisk by that loss. It was in Brazil, so, you know, Vitor Belfort's hand was raised, but you can kind of take away that asterisk because it was Vitor Belfort. So, he's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. Cesar Ferreira, on the other hand, is 3-1 in his last 4 fights. He's less experienced for sure, as he's only 12-6, but he's 7-4 in the UFC. So if you're going by like percentages, he's won a high percentage of his UFC fights. He's only 32 years old. He's 3-1 in his last 4 fights, as I said, with wins over Hermanson, Anthony Smith, and Bamwose Olowe, or whatever his name was. His loss was to Ilias Theodoro, who was 14-1 at the time. So he's 3-1 in his last 4 fights. He scored more takedowns than every single one of his opponents in every fight that he's ever been in that a takedown was scored. A couple fights there were no takedowns scored at all, but every other fight he's took down his opponent. So he's definitely not trash. He's coming off of wins over Anthony Smith, Olowe Bambuzoe, and I believe his name is Jack Hermanson, right? That's his first name. So, yeah, I'm picking Cesar here. He's 32 years old. He's a little younger than Marquardt. I mean, Nate Marquardt is more experienced and stuff here, but I don't know, man. I just got a feeling that Cesar's going to win this. He's been doing better as of late. Marquardt could win, though. As I said, this was a little harder a pick for me. Next, we've got fucking Andre Arlovski, the pit bull. Did I sound like a dying dog there? My bad. Andre Arlovski, my fucking dog, bro. Andre Pitbull Arlovski, 25-15, 14-9 in the UFC, 38 years old, fucking coming off of a 5-fight losing streak to Marcin Tybura, Francis Ngannou, Josh Barnett, Alistair Overeem, and Stipe Miocic. His last win was over Frank Mir in 2015. He's fighting Junior Albini, who's a lot younger, 26 years old, 12 years younger. He's 14-2, but he's only 1-0 in the UFC. Junior Albini's got a hell of a story. His first fight in the UFC was versus Timothy Johnson. It was a first-round knockout. Junior Albini started training MMA to lose weight at 13 years old, man. He was like 364 pounds at 13 years old. He started boxing, started jiu-jitsu a year later. He's been fighting MMA now for a while. He's fought at light heavyweight in the past, but it was, you know, shows where they were paying a lot less than the UFC, that's for sure. And he was fighting at light heavyweight. Some of his opponents would pull out after a couple bad weight cuts, and opponents pulling out, and I think he had a loss at light heavyweight. He was like, fuck that, I'm fighting at heavyweight, and he believes he's big enough for the heavyweight division. He said he's seen Stipe Miocic, and he's as tall as Stipe. He said he thought his last opponent was going to be bigger than he was, so he feels good at heavyweight, but he's young. He's definitely, I mean, I don't even know if Andre Arlovski's in the gate him damn self at this point. So I don't know if this is a gatekeeper fight. I mean, Andre Arlovski needs this win himself. He needs a win, so it ain't like, you know, he can really afford it. If he loses this fight, I would assume he's going to somewhere else, either retirement or Bellator or somewhere, Risen, somewhere. I mean, I don't see how the UFC is going to, you know, can keep letting Andre Arlovski fight on a 6-fight losing streak after this, especially with pulling Mark Hunt from fights and shit for, you know, that interview or whatever, but that's not what this is about. So Andre Arlovski, man, I'm sure the comment section is going to be saying, oh, he needs to retire and all of that, but if he can get a win, shouldn't it be over this guy, right? I mean, I don't know. Junior Albini, he's 14-2. That's a really good record for a heavyweight, but he definitely hasn't fought anybody as experienced as Andre Arlovski yet. I'm gonna pick Junior Albini here. I mean, because I don't know. I don't think I really got to explain that one too much more. I mean, I went over the stats, did the knowledge, motherfucker. Junior Albini coming through, possibly with the win. There's more to his story, I guess. I mean, they did an article saying that after he got his paycheck from his UFC fight, he got $20,000. I'm sure $10,000 to fight, $10,000 to win. But he also won the bonus, and he said he was able to buy his daughter her first toys ever. So that was dope. You know, he said that he got a lot of criticism because his family, his wife and his daughter,
had to live a hard life because he wanted to pursue his dream as an MMA fighter. Now it's all starting to pay off. So Junior Albini's a young, and the heavyweight division really needs some young guys, some young fresh blood, some solid dudes. And Junior Albini, I think he's got potential to be that guy. Beat Andrei Arlovski and then get another couple big fights in the heavyweight division. Let's go, Junior Albini. Fuck you, Matt. All right, let's get to the co-main event. Matt Brown versus Diego Sanchez, retirement fight for Matt Brown. Matt Brown is 1-5 in his last 6 fights, unfortunately, because he is a lot better than that record says. Matt Brown is a motherfucking savage, fan favorite for sure, and even though he's 1-5, that's bullshit because he's not 1-5 in spirit. The guys he's lost to are literally the fucking best guys in the welterweight division. Donald Cerrone, Jake Ellenberger, Damian Maia, fucking Robbie Lawler. Who else? It doesn't even matter who else. It's somebody as beastie. You know what I'm saying? Matt Brown, he's a beast, man. So he did say he's retiring after this fight, but he'll be staying in the USADA pool, which means he might come back. So with that being said, Matt Brown's 22-16 overall, 13-10 in the UFC. His last win was over Tim Means, but if his last fight versus Donald Cerrone, it was a pretty brutal knockout by the hands, or the feet, I should say, of Donald Cerrone's leg. It was a pretty brutal knockout, but he was winning that fight before Cerrone got comfortable in the 3rd round and knocked him out. If it would have went to decision, he would have probably won that fight. But Donald Cerrone got comfortable and ended up knocking him out. So he's fighting Diego Sanchez in his retirement fight. Diego Sanchez has fought as little as featherweight, I believe, but most recently he's been fighting at lightweight. Now he's returning to welterweight to fight Matt Brown, who's already an established welterweight. But Diego Sanchez is 29-10, 16-10 in the UFC. Both of these guys, well, Matt Brown's 36, Diego Sanchez is 35 years old, but Diego Sanchez is 2-2 in his last 4 fights at lightweight. He's got losses to Ally Quinta, knockout losses most recently, and also Diego Sanchez also has another loss at lightweight. But his wins were over Marcin Held and Jim Miller. So he's moving up to welterweight. He's fighting a very, very experienced welterweight, even though Matt Brown's 1-5. As I said, he's not in spirit. So I'm picking Matt Brown to win this fight. Both of these fighters are coming off of egg-scrambling knockout losses, though. Matt Brown has had a little more time to let his yoke settle, as he was knocked out, I believe, in December, and Diego Sanchez was knocked out in April. So, as not only that, well, yeah, we'll just leave it there. So I'm picking Matt Brown to win. Dustin Poirier versus Anthony Pettis. Man, this one I put a little thought into, but I'm gonna go ahead and go with Dustin Diamond Poirier. Dustin Poirier is 5-1 over his last 7 fights, and that's because you might think, hey, that doesn't add up, because yet he's coming off of a no contest versus Eddie Alvarez, where he was really winning the fight, and then he got kneed by Eddie Alvarez in the head. It was an illegal knee. He was kind of playing that game, the Weidman Musasi game. Got kneed. It was an illegal knee, so the fight was called a no contest, even though I feel like it probably should have went to Dustin Poirier because he was kneed illegally, kind of like Chris Weidman. Or how was that? Okay, you get the point. It was controversial. There was a lot of controversy. So Dustin Poirier, other than that, though, was 5-1 in his last 6 fights. He has wins over Jim Miller, Bobby Green, Joe Duffy, Yancy Medeiros. His loss was an egg-scrambling knockout to Michael Johnson. There was a lot of anger and animosity going into that fight, so his head probably wasn't on as straight as he would have liked it. Probably a little clouded up. I don't think he's hating Anthony Pettis as much as he was Michael Johnson going into that fight. So I think his head will be on a little cleared, and he's probably going to be a little bit bigger in this fight, as Anthony Pettis, his opponent, out of his last 3 fights, 2 of those were at featherweight. One of them was an interim championship fight versus Max Holloway, where he missed weight, which is why he's back at lightweight. He looked good in his lightweight return versus Jim Miller. He picked up a win, but Anthony Pettis is 1-3 in his last 4 lightweight fights overall. Before his featherweight stint, he was the former lightweight champion, lost his belt to RDA, lost a fight to Eddie Alvarez, and then one more lightweight as well before he dropped to featherweight. He picked up a win over Charles Oliveira at featherweight, but then he lost to Max Holloway. So he's back at lightweight. So Dustin Poirier, you can expect to have a little bit of a size advantage here. Both fighters, though, have fought Eddie Alvarez and Jim Miller since 2016. And Poirier arguably did better than in both of those fights. So I'm going to pick Poirier here because, for one, he's got the size advantage. He did better versus their common opponents. The one thing definitely that's worth pointing out is this is a 5-round fight. Dustin Poirier's never been 5 rounds in his career. I don't know if I don't think he should have too much of a problem with it, as Anthony, you train for a 5-round fight, and Anthony Pettis, he has been 5-round fights. I think he's only been the distance twice though, and he lost both of those fights. So I don't know if he's necessarily the cardio king Clay Guida is, but there is something to say that Anthony Pettis has been in a lot more 5-round fights before and actually been the distance. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm picking Poirier. Those are my predictions for this whole fight card. It's in Virginia, I believe, Norfolk, Virginia. Main event, Anthony Pettis versus Dustin Poirier. Co-main event is the retirement fight of Matt Brown versus Diego Sanchez. So it is what it is. Let the full-time family know what the fuck you talking about in the comments. I'm out.
Bye, Felicia.